Hello guys, welcome back to Not Just Mecha, it's Marco here and today we talk about large-scale display models. A lot of you ask me to expand the offer of the channel to a wider variety of modeling styles. And since I love to jump around different modeling worlds, I can't be happier about that. So in the next future you'll see a lot of interesting stuff from historical figures and tanks to action figures, anime girls and resin kits. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button to always know what happens on the channel. I hope these videos will be an inspiration to start exploring new different ways to live and enjoy the hobby, and to understand that the barriers between the various modeling realities and their specific techniques are a blurry thing, and you can mix and match everything to create your own toolbox. Miniatures are great, and you can push the level and quality of painting to extreme levels working on them. But there's a reason why in modeling shows and painting competitions around the world you find for the most part figures in larger scales and busts. The most popular size at the moment, especially for fantasy and sci-fi themes, is 75mm. 54mm figures are very common between historical painters. 90mm models are starting to appear more often, and you can find incredible busts for every possible fantasy, sci-fi and historical theme or character. Again, we can do crazy stuff on miniatures, but imagine the possibilities of working on such large canvases, where the designs are not focused on a single style or franchise. The sculpts don't have to be adapted or limited by gaming needs, and the main goal and everything from the beginning is focused like a laser beam on painting. Few months ago I started publishing a few disjointed videos about this topic, but I finally have a good plan for a proper long-term series. I'll use display models for longer uncut videos, or at least mildly edited videos, to give justice to the process and show you every possible detail of a complex work in progress.
This is the model I use for this block of videos, Sienna Starkiller by Black Sun Miniatures. If you are looking for something with a lot of strength, energy and testosterone, Black Sun is your brand. And here is the model in person. The cast is super clean and refined, and every part has precise keys and slots, so the building process was very simple and straightforward. The kit is made by the sword and the end that connects the huge weapon to the body. No problem here because the light weight of the sword is supported by the shoulder. Then we have the main body, the right leg, the rock on the base and the piece of cloth on the belt. I glued everything in place, keeping separated only the head, to easily work on the portrait. That's the only thing I'll paint as organic material. The only imperfection I need to fix is the little gap between the leg and the armor. I'll use my universal trick to fix any kind of gap and uneven connections. Millibutter. Cut a small equal amount of the two parts with an old blade. Mix them really well and make a little donut. Pour some isopropyl alcohol on it and start mixing with an expandable brush. Milliput is water soluble, but the suspension with alcohol is smoother, more stable and dries faster. This way I can regulate its consistency from totally fluid to a consistent cream and apply it everywhere with a brush to fix large or small gaps. After 1-2 hours, depending on the quantity you used, you can wash the model and start painting. This model was super easy to prepare without meaningful challenges. So for a full detailed walkthrough on building and fixing a more complex kit, check this video up here. Here I make a little stand for the head with a piece of metal wire. The spiral will give you more volume and a better grip, and a good little handle with a flat ring. Since I want to look like a pro, I'll fix it on my fancy modular painting handle. In this kind of models, the reasoning around their final look starts from the very beginning, even before the planning of the color scheme. I'll use a squared wooden block as handle. I want the model in the same position it will have on its fancy plinth at the end of the paint job. The positioning is very important because the pose and its relation with the four sides of the plinth sets the four main views of the model. The figure will be obviously seen in 360 degrees, but the plinth sets precise cinematic frames and views on the model that have to be considered carefully. One option is to keep the sword parallel to the observer, using it as main view. In this case, the figure will face to the right side, looking something in the distance, and offering the central part of the body and the left side as main view. Another option is to use the lines of the model to make a diagonal on the plinth from corner to corner. The rock on the base will move in the direction of the viewer, followed by the leg. Sword and arm will create depth moving backward, and the face will look directly to the observer, facing the main view. Both are valid options, but they tell a totally different story, and the mood of the piece is strongly changed by this apparently simple choice. Always invest some quality time thinking to the composition of your model on the base. I choose to go with the second option to better fill the space, create more depth and movement with the front-back elements, and to increase the idea of strength and confidence, fixing a strong and proud portrait to the viewer. I add 2 pegs into the rock with a drop of glue, and I fix the model on the wooden base with a little piece of butyl. I don't use glue here because I don't want to use too much strength on the finished model, and butyl is the perfect solution for a stable but temporary bond. You can work directly on the good base, masking it very well, but I prefer to work on something expandable. At this point I need to decide the color scheme and, even most important, my main environmental light. This is something that we tend to forget on miniatures, that often needs to be neutral to fit any possible battlefield, table or gaming mat. But with display models we are telling a precise story, and the environment, even if not in the scene, is part of that story. A white armor, and obviously this is true for any other color, doesn't look the same in a desert and in the middle of a snowstorm. And it doesn't look the same during a warm summer sunset and a cold winter evening. You have to decide this now because it will influence every step of planning and painting the color scheme. And even if usually the best solution is to set a situation that can valorize your scheme to the maximum, the two things at the end are independent. Again, you can wear the same white t-shirt in a summer morning or a winter night, and it will look drastically different. In this case, I'll start from the color scheme because I have a very precise idea of the look I want. I'll paint the figure as a tribute to Samus from Metroid, and her Varia suit. Barrier suit if you started from the very first game like me. The first chunk of decision making on the scheme is already done. But when you take your color schemes from other media, it's always interesting and very educational to retro-engineering the choices of color and understand how and why they work. This way, this reasoning becomes part of your process, and you can use it even when you don't have a reference. Samus works on a loose split complementary scheme, where yellow and orange are the main sensations. Red is a secondary tone with less surface, but still striking and powerful for its own nature. And we have a blue turquoise accent on the arm cannon. The little green elements work well with everything because they create contrast with the warm tones, and green is already inside the turquoise, so it doesn't clash with the main accent. Let's take a break to thank my best patrons. We are more than 100 sharing knowledge in the Facebook group, and this flow of creativity makes me so happy. Thanks a million, guys. At this point I move this reasoning on the model, choosing the correspondent parts. The armor is pretty easy to translate, and I want to keep the turquoise accent for the sword. I'm still undecided between sword and left arm or only sword, but it's probably better to keep the focus on the weapon and use a neutral color on the arm, to bridge the two main areas. On top of this I plan my main light, choosing temperature and direction. The scheme is already powerful, pop and loud, and I don't want to complicate my life too much. So I'll use the warm light of an alien sun to push the warm tones, and I set it to the late afternoon, almost sunset, to have it coming from above, but with a low dramatic angle on the right side. This choice will set my main light as warm, so I'll go with cold shadows to create the maximum amount of contrast, and the direction and intensity of my black and white sketch. Sometimes you find imperfections only after priming. Don't worry too much and fix the problem before going on. A good primer and a good priming allow you to fix these problems quite easily, and go back with black primer to hide the crimes. I start spraying white ink as a soft mist in the direction of my main light. Some of you asked why I do first a black and white sketch even on gaming models. This step helps you to understand the model and to set from the beginning the volumes and the contrast between lights and shadows. These are the pillars of a good paint job, and if you set good foundations at this stage, you'll know precisely if the model works or not, from the very beginning when you painted a single color over the primer, investing only a few minutes of real work. This sketch will work as a map when you move to adding colors, keeping the look consistent and effective from start to finish. Realizing that the volumes or the contrast don't work after a couple of weeks of painting can be a little frustrating. Planning and sketching the black and white underpainting is always my main objective in the first day of this kind of projects. After the first general mist, I move to a more localized application, in the areas that face better my main light, increasing their value and opacity, with more layers of transparent white. I focus more on the two main views, front and back. The lateral secondary views will be a natural consequence of the main ones. Keeping in mind that the model will have these four main angles, I start establishing with the sketch interesting silhouettes with lights and shadows. This concept is pretty modern in miniature painting, and artists like Alonso Torrent are absolute masters in this. The idea is to consider the four main views as four different artworks, and frame the figure with an illustrational dramatic silhouette of lights and shadows that will make the shape pop from every background, creating even more volume and scenic presence, exactly like an illustrator creates the illusion of volume on a piece of paper or any other two-dimensional medium. This is one of the things that requires a careful study of illustrations, artworks and paintings. Retro-engineering the work of great artists, you can learn a lot of useful stuff to apply to miniature painting. This process requires trials and errors, and I go back and forth between white and black ink to better fix my lights and shadows, and the shape, flow and consistency of my silhouettes. When I'm satisfied with the composition, I take a lot of pictures of the model. As I said, this is my map for the next stages. When I add colors on top of the sketch, it will influence them in transparency, but there will be parts and moments when the underpainting will seem to disappear. These pictures used as a reference will solve any doubt I could have. And I close the first session of painting, quickly fixing the main tones of the scheme. This is my own thing more than a proper rule. I like to see the main colors in place to check if what I have in mind works on the real piece. This is something I do also on miniatures and gaming models, to have the general feel of the painted figure. I start with the general coat of yellow orangezo. This will be my yellow and a solid base for orange and red, that are usually very transparent and don't work well over pure white. To paint the orange, I use a transparent red over yellow. You can check the translucency or opacity of inks on their label. The red will not only optically mix with yellow thanks to the transparency, but for their nature inks take longer to dry in the micro level, so they will actually mix in layers on the model. That's also why they are so good for any kind of blending. I saw that it's diffusing the idea that you need to varnish inks before painting on top of them. This is a myth I need to bust. They just take longer to dry in their depth, especially if you apply the thick layer instead of a thin coat. Just give them the proper time to do their job. To fix the red parts, I use an opaque red tone. Turquoise on the blade, and what will be the Zero Suit appearing in the back. And green on the main lights after a reinforce of the underpainting with white. Again, this is probably not the right time to add these details, but I like to see the tones in place. And this is the end of day 1 and the first session of painting. I hope you liked this overview of my process to plan and set high quality models. It can seem a general overthinking of simple stuff, but this is what really makes the difference between a gaming token and a piece of art. So, stay tuned for the next episodes.
If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can always ask me anything down below with a comment, and you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials. And if you want to support the channel and my work, check my Patreon page and its rewards, and maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!